How can the Sun Belt compete in the landscape that is college athletics? It is Locked On Sun Belt.
You are Locked On Sun Belt, your daily podcast on the Sun Belt Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Dave Schultz, Locked On Sun Belt, your teams every day. Today's episode brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. All right, we told you he was coming on. He did come on, and he came on for almost an hour. John Hartwell, former ULM AD, Troy AD, Utah State AD, Ole Miss administrator. He's been in college sports for the better part of 30 years. Now he's on the other side of things with College Sports Solutions, the consulting firm that helps get coaches jobs, among other things. So we'll see how that goes. He's got a lot of openings already. In the first part, and this thing lasted almost an hour, which was great. We'll break it up into two. We're not doing an hour episode. First part is how the role as the AD has changed. He goes over that. I ask him why the business model of college has not changed, and we go over that. And, of course, we talk about what happened over the summer with Louisiana Tech coming into the Sun Belt, and he was out front of it. He wanted them in, and he was the only AD that I noticed that went on the record, in fact, went on TV and said, we want them in, and they should be getting in. So there's a lot to talk about. The ULM portion of the show will be in part 2. We'll have to wait for that. All right. He is a longtime college administrator. He's now with College Sports Solutions. He is John Hartwell, and he is Locked On Sun Belt. Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Sun Belt, your teams every day. Very thrilled and honored to have our next guest, John Hartwell with College Sports Solutions, coming up. Former ULM AD, Utah State AD, joining us. And thank you so much, John, for hopping on the podcast. So our paths, I want people to know where our paths cross, because it was the most interesting thing I've ever heard, because you usually don't hear this, and you correct me if I'm wrong, okay? So John is a Mobile native, okay? He was the Utah State AD, and he was lobbying for and almost got the Auburn AD job by coming on my radio station, WNSP, not with me, but with the morning guys, right, Mark and Lee. And you were coming on that because you're an Alabama guy. Your family went to Auburn. You wanted the job. And I think you were getting the job until John Cohen decided he wanted the job at the last second. So, explain that process, how, you went on the radio. You weren't shy about saying, yeah, I want the job.
Yeah, like you said, a lot of ties there to Auburn, and had, prior to going to Utah State, was the AD at Troy for 3 years from 2012 to 15. And, was in the mix, certainly. And by that time, folks knew that I was in the mix. I mean, that's one thing. And you look at where they stand today with John Cohen and Hugh Freeze, and man, there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen on the plains in Auburn. So,
well, that's always been the case.
Yeah. And so by that time, folks knew that I was involved in the job, and the people at Utah State knew I was involved in the job too. Just because, like you said, growing up in Mobile, both my parents, both of my mom's parents, and two sisters, all Auburn grads, grew up going to games there. A lot of people say this, but I was actually in the stands as a 6-year-old. The Bama punt, the 1971 Auburn Alabama game, when it was 17-3 or 16-3, and Auburn came back in the last 5 minutes, blocked 2 punts, returned them for touchdowns to win 17-16. So yeah, but I appreciate you having me on today, David. Obviously, transitioning from sitting in the AD's chair the last 13 years to a consultant / coaching search opportunity that I'm excited about. Our family's moving back to LA, if you will, Lower Alabama, moving to the Fairhope, Point Clear area. So, but I obviously have spent the last 30 years in this field. Georgia State, prior to them being in the Sun Belt, was there 6 years, was at Ole Miss for almost 10 years, from 2003 to 12. And as I tell people all the time, hey, several chapters in my book one day are going to be, hey, I had the opportunity in those 10 years to be heavily involved with the football program, going from David Cutcliffe to Ed Orgeron to Houston Nutt to Hugh Freeze as head coaches. So you talk about the spectrum there. I got the spectrum.
Yeah, we need the 30 for 30 on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. And then the last 13 years as the AD between Troy, Utah State, and ULM, until making the decision to step out, do something a little bit different, be able to move back, like I said, to South Alabama, and excited about it. And I think based on what's happened in the first half of the season, a pretty good window to go into the coaching search business as well.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. All right. So obviously you have all this experience as the AD, and obviously as soon as NIL came in, not even so much the transfer portal, but NIL kind of changed the business model. How has the role of the AD changed in the last 5 years with NIL coming in?
Yeah, I would say that the biggest things again, back to coaching searches is, hey, the whole matrix of what you look for in a coaching candidate and what you evaluate coaches on has changed, because especially at the group of 5 level, player development used to be really important, because you were not on a regular basis going to get the 4 and 5 star, sometimes even the 3-star recruits. You looked for the diamonds in the rough, if you will. The 1 and 2-star guys. I mean, the perfect example I'll use is this is one who obviously I was very close to and continue to stay in contact with, Ahmad Hardy. You look at what Ahmad Hardy came from, a small 1A school in South Mississippi last or 2
years ago,
seasons ago. Yeah. Yep. Came to ULM totally under the radar screen, being recruited, led the nation as a true freshman, or 4 true freshmen in rushing yards last year in FBS, parlays that into now being the starting tailback at Missouri, scored 2 touchdowns when they beat Auburn, ironically enough, this past Saturday. And so the ability to find those diamonds in the rough, to develop them and to keep them for 3 or 4 years, has gone by the wayside for the most part. I won't say it never will happen again, but it's highly unlikely based on the dollars that are available in NIL today. So the game has totally changed from that perspective, from being a developmental program. Maybe you're still a developmental program, but you're not going to have those kids for 3 or 4 years. The other thing is, and when you look at a lot of these job changes that have already occurred, the window of opportunity for, quote, new coaches, if you will, is not 4 or 5 years anymore. It's 2 years, maybe, just because you can't say, well, hey, I've got to have all my own guys in, and that's 4 or 5 recruiting cycles. Now it's, hey, you can flip the vast majority of the roster almost overnight with the transfer portal. And so if you don't, that honeymoon period is not 2 or 3 years anymore to see results. It may be 3 or 4 games. You probably are going to have at least a season to get it going, especially if the program previously was an entire train wreck. But the patience level and the honeymoon length has shortened greatly. Now, what's going to be interesting to see is, with all of the dollars funneling into NIL, and what is it? Again, Texas Tech arguably has spent more money than anybody. $55 million, I think, is what I heard on their football roster. Well, it wasn't enough to win in Tempe the other night against Arizona State. And I would venture to say, Arizona State, under the leadership of Kenny Dillingham, who is a rock star. That guy, he's a great sound clip because he's real, but but his realness is part of why the kids who play for him want to run through a wall for him as well. Right. But they're probably, if I had to guesstimate, Arizona State's probably in the $25 million range, so less than half of what Texas Tech has. But on any given night, and I think that is why you're seeing an even further surge in the popularity of college football. does everybody love NIL and the fact that there's crazy amounts of money going to these 18 to 22-year-old kids? No, but what it has done is it has created more parity, and the Indianas, the Georgia Techs, the Arizona States, some folks who are not perennial football powers are the Vanderbilts. Gosh, what a story with Clark Lee and what he's done in Nashville. But it has created some more parity, and I think that has grown the popularity of college football as a whole.
Let's take a time out. We'll come back. We'll continue our conversation with John Hartwell, the former ULM Warhawks AD, now with College Sports Solutions. We ask him about the business model and why it hasn't changed. Is it going to change? What can be done to change it? We will do that right after I tell you about Monarch and FanDuel. Let's be honest, most of us can't even name all of our financial accounts, let alone what they're worth. Between 401ks, savings, and investments, it's easy to lose track, and that can mean leaving money on the table. That's why I started using Monarch, an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Don't let the financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarch.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarch.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. And FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love how FanDuel gives me so many ways to play. I built parlays, tried player props, and even followed the live lines during the games. Makes watching football even more exciting when you've got a little something riding on the action. Whether you're a casual fan or love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. All right, Dave Schultz, Lockdown Sunbelt, your teams every day. Let's continue our conversation with former ULM AD John Hartwell, talking about the business model and the finances of college athletics. Talking with John Hartwell, College Sports Solutions, Lockdown Sunbelt, your teams every day. All right, so a couple things have not changed, and you would seem to think they would be. And I'm going to give credit to my brother, Dr. Seth Schultz, on this one, because these coaches are extremely well paid, which is fine because they can get fired. But it seems as though they get a lot of money for not doing the job that the teams want them to do, and the schools end up paying them a huge amount of money not to coach. Is there any way that can change? Whereas, look, if we get rid of you because you're not good enough, we're going to give you a percentage. If you don't want the job, we'll find somebody else who'll take it, because someone else, you would think somebody else always would. How can you be with, a $50 million payout for, James Franklin? I think Billy Napier is getting 20 or 30, and Napier doesn't even have to get a job. He's going to get all his money. On the Sun Belt, South Alabama's got 1.8 for Major Applewhite. I think Clay Helton, $3 million. And Desimo just signed an extension. I just don't think these schools have the money to buy them out. And at the same time, the cushiest gig is the Division I FBS coach who gets fired because they're getting anywhere from 7 to 8 figures not to work. I mean, how can college football athletics reel that in and not give away the money for people who are not working? Because this, let's be honest, it's going to cost Penn State $100 million to get a new coaching staff.
Yeah, you make a great point there, and that goes back to the whole NIL. If people are spending $40-50 million on NIL, where is the money coming from for those buyouts? Because the vast majority of the time, the dollars that are used in these buyouts are private donor funds, just like a lot of the NIL money is. So at some point, I know there's a handful of schools out there who have endless bank or endless oil well, if you will, and as it relates to some of the Texas schools and South Louisiana schools. But at some point, you're not going to be able to afford it. And I think an interesting example that's out there right now is Florida State. I mean, I know there's a lot of folks who are not pleased with a lot of folks in Seminole Nation who are not pleased with where Florida State stands football wise. with Mike Norvell, but do they have $50 million to buy him out, especially the money they spent, whether it was, toying with getting out of the ACC and the subsequent lawsuits there. There's so many things. So back to contracts, a couple of things. And when I'm reading these, and again, every situation is different. I don't want to be critical of guys who are friends of mine who've sat in the seat and say, why in the heck would an AD have a contract done without mitigation in there? And basically the elementary definition of mitigation is, hey, if you're due a $20 million buyout, yeah, we're going to pay that to you over a period of time, whether it's a one lump sum or over a period of 3 years. But there's a responsibility for you to go seek additional employment, not necessarily go sit on the beach and count your cash. And if that's not done, the language in most of them says, hey, you can't just say every 6 months, well, yeah, I inquired about this job, or my agent inquired about that job. You've got to actively demonstrate that you're seeking other jobs. But some of these contracts that are being bought out here, just announced in the last week or so, that don't have any mitigation to them, I don't understand how that transpired in the contract negotiation. I mean, I can promise you, whether it's Jimmy Sexton or Russ Campbell or whoever's negotiating those contracts, yeah, they're going to push for everything they can for their client, for the coach. But there's a responsibility on behalf of the institution for the athletic director, the general counsel, the president, whoever's involved in that negotiation, to push back some and say, hey, this can't be a one-sided contract. And, but again, some of those that have come to light here in the last few days have that. Now, one other thing, sorry, I don't mean to get long-winded, but there's a lot of pieces here. One other thing that you would think from a common business sense standpoint, which again does not happen very often in college athletics, is you would say, okay, yes, high risk, high reward, but you can turn these things around. So part of the argument in the past, pre-NIL and pre-transfer portal, was, hey, you need to give me a 5, 6, or my client 5, 6, 7, 8, gosh, sometimes even a 10-year contract, because it's going to take a while to turn this thing around. Well, as we talked about earlier, it doesn't take so long to turn it around now. So common sense would say, hey, let's do a 3-year deal that may be more on an annual basis, but protect the institution of having a smaller buyout. But unless that gets done across the board, all the ADs, all the institutions make that decision to do that, as long as somebody, whether it's Florida or 2 people, whoever, whatever institutions say, no, we're going all in. Indiana, right, we're going all in. And, if things go south 18 months from now with Signetti, which obviously it doesn't look like it's going to now, that, hey, they're on the hook for $96 million. I mean, that sails right by what A&M did for Jimbo Fisher. I mean, crazy. It makes zero business sense at all, but people are doing it.
Talking to John Hartwell, College Sports Solution, Locked On Sunbelt, your teams every day. All right, so I'm going to go back to go forward, because it doesn't feel like, and I say this all the time, life is about making the adjustments, and it doesn't feel like college athletics have made the adjustment. So I'm going to go back way back, some 35 years ago. I actually gave a speech in a college class about college athletics and the profitability. All right. And I'm not sure how much my speech teacher was a fan, but although he did like Syracuse at the time, because that would come up in class all the time. But he was telling me back then, and I didn't know, there's a reason why college athletics doesn't turn a profit. They spend all their money, whether it be on the coaches, the administrators, or the facilities. They do that on purpose. They're showing zero profit on purpose. And it doesn't feel like they've changed that, although there's now another $20 million expense. So they haven't changed the way they're paying out. Like, I don't know if this is feasible. It probably isn't. But as soon as that NIL got going, I would have told all my coaches, I don't care what your contracts are, including me, everyone's taking a 10% pay cut. Because if you want the players, we got to pay the players. And we don't have another $20 million coming in. We have, say, $100 million. And, instead of firing the young people who are making 50 grand, we got to take it from the top end because that's where the money is. Obviously, that doesn't happen. All right. They fire the people living paycheck to paycheck. Can you change the business model? Because college athletics just keeps, we're going private equity. That always turns out well. That's got huge mistakes. Huge downfall to it. I'm not sure what the positiveness of that. Maybe you can address that as well. But it doesn't feel like college athletics changed the business model. They just kept on going in the direction that it was going in.
Yeah, and again, it depends. You have to look at it on an institution by institution basis because you're right. The juggernaut has not slowed down as a whole, and where a lot of that money continues to come from is institutional support. Oh, and by the way, if you look nationwide, enrollment is not growing. It's in fact declining a lot of places. And when folks are enrolled, a lot of times now, it's not traditional enrollment where you're on campus. People are taking a couple of online classes at a time, and that's not generating the money for institutions that it once did. And so part of that is, hey, if athletics is taking more money from the big pot of the institution, and the big pot of the institution is shrinking, somewhere along the line, that equation is not going, that big pot institutionally is going to dry up. And more likely at group of 5 or lower level schools than at the Power 4. I mean, there are places that continue, one, to turn a profit in athletics by themselves, so they do not have to go into the coffers of the main university funds. Not a whole bunch, but there's probably 35 schools that do that. Power 5 school, and you may say, well, gosh, John, there's 65 Power 5 schools. Yeah, or Power 4 schools. There are schools that are not turning a profit. Iowa State is not turning a profit. There's some schools out there that they continue to feed that. But I will say this, institutionally, they have made the decision that, yes, we know as an institution, we're spending more than we're bringing in. But the advertising, the promotional value, the branding for our institution, that is worth it for us to continue to feed the tiger, if you will. And places like Rutgers, when you look at the amount of institutional support, I think they're upwards of $80 to $100 million a year that they're pumping in, because the athletic department is not only not self-sustainable, it is a blood-sucking machine, and that's happening a lot of places. And if you continue to see the enrollment decline, like you see a lot of places, at some point, some of those schools are not going to be able to continue to exist at the current level that they're at. So there's some tough decisions, tough conversations, and I'll be candid. I mean, that's happening in the state of Louisiana right now with multiple institutions, because again, some of these schools have carried rolling debt for a number of years, and the ability of the institution to kind of bury that with auxiliary services and things, whether it's housing or dining services or some of the ancillary functions on a campus that are able to float an athletics deficit. Some of those pots are drying up. So it will be interesting. The haves will continue to excel. And like I talked about earlier, you've got the popularity and viewership and everything else of college athletics, in particular football, because unless you're at Marquette or Gonzaga or Wichita State or Villanova, football is the engine that's driving the train. Those other schools I named who don't have football, men's basketball does. but football is the engine that drives the train from a revenue standpoint, and it spends the most money too. But at some, there are going to be hard decisions, and as I look at the next 3 to 5 to 10 years, you're going to see some reclassifications, and you may even have some schools who say, hey, we really can't afford to do it at the level we're trying to in football right now. But you know what? We're going to invest our money in the diamond sports. We're going to invest our money in baseball, softball, men's and women's basketball. Whereas, when you do that, all of a sudden, let's say you got 35 in baseball, 35 in softball, that's 70 and another 15 each in men's and women's basketball. You really got a total of 100 student athletes who you were trying to pump the money to give you the best opportunity to succeed, as opposed to 350, 400, or in the cases of some of these schools that play everything under the sun, like Stanford, 600 or 700 student athletes. It is not financially sustainable long-term for a lot of these institutions.
All right, so it'll be interesting. You talked about enrollment, and so I could have said back in the day, Nick Saban was overpaid and underpaid. Overpaid as a head football coach, but underpaid as an ambassador for Alabama, because during his time as head coach, they end up with more out-of-state students than they do in-state students, and that costs a lot more money to go to Alabama. So it'll be interesting to see over the next 5 years if Alabama's enrollment does go down because they aren't winning national championships as often as they were under Nick Saban. Let's take one more time out. We'll wrap up part one of our conversation with former ULM AD John Hartwell. He talks about what happened as Louisiana Tech was trying to get into the Sun Belt over the summer, which obviously they did. We'll do that right after I tell you about Game Time. College football is back, and I couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing like it. But let's be real. Actually, getting tickets can feel more like a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping out at checkout. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. All right, I looked before I recorded. You can still get into App State at ODU for less than $40, and that includes fees. I wouldn't wait because I got a feeling those ticket prices are going to go up before they come down. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. All right, Dave Schultz, Locked On Sunbelt, your teams every day. Let's wrap up our conversation with John Hartwell, former ULM AD. Does go into a little bit of detail on what happened with La Tech trying to get into the Sun Belt and how eventually they did. Talking to John Hartwell, College Sports Solutions, Locked On Sunbelt, your team every day. All right, you brought up a bunch of stuff. We'll go back to some of that for sure. But I do want to talk about what happened over the summer because as far as I know, you were the only athletic director to go on the record lobbying for Louisiana Tech, all right, to get into the Sun Belt. And I was told that there was the teams in the East didn't want them. They didn't have the vote, and they were working through it. And you were like, we're getting there. Can you tell me what happened with that? How did that all start? Obviously, it was a reaction to Texas State. It seemed like it took a long time. I guess the commissioner, Keith Gill, said, we actually have to wait until they're officially offered before we can make a move. Fill us in, if you can, what you can say on what happened behind the scenes of Louisiana Tech joining the Sun Belt, because I was for it, but yet I was being told that they weren't coming in yet because other teams didn't want them.
Yeah, and I'll start off by saying, hey, kudos to Keith Gill. Keith Gill did a tremendous job of navigating the entire process. Sunbelt is very fortunate to have him as a commissioner. He gets it. He understands big picture, has great relationships throughout college athletics, and he's done an outstanding job for the Sunbelt. So, it did not happen overnight that Texas State was leaving. They laid their cards on the table pretty early, said, hey, we're looking for a bigger platform. Seems like maybe some karma has occurred in the last 3 weeks on the football field, but I'll leave that there for now. So there were behind the scenes conversations, looking at, even before maybe some of those institutions that could be a fit expressed interest or expressed saying, hey, we're not interested, but just looked at, all of the things that would go into it, operating budgets, success, what sports they'd had success in. Again, football being really important in that, men's and women's basketball, and on down the line. So, and there were conversations with athletic directors, with presidents. Hey, who would be a good fit? Who would have an interest? What makes sense? Because what a lot of people don't understand, when you look at adding a school, and yes, the net was the same because you lose Texas State and you add La Tech, but you certainly don't want to add a school just for the sake of checking the box to add it. Although, scheduling with 13 teams, with an odd number of teams, would have been tough, but you would have done it if it were a school or an institution that was not going to at least keep you status quo from a competitive standpoint, from a viewership standpoint. All of those things played in there. So, and there were some other schools that were involved in it, but at the end of the day, La Tech, they very much wanted in. Ryan Ivy, Dr. Henderson, those folks, the Davison family, all were key components into them getting in, and I think they are going to be a good addition to the league. You and I kind of talked offline a little bit. It's going to be interesting to see, because the Monroe-Ruston area is not a major metropolitan area, but to have two Sunbelt schools within 30 miles of each other, how that's going to coexist will be interesting to see it play out. But I know, speaking from the schools in the West, it will be much better for the schools in the West from a travel cost standpoint, because you get to swap going to San Marcos, which was really not a bus ride from anywhere. Even from Lafayette, not just a hop, skip, and a jump over to San Marcos. So I know it will save folks money from there. And obviously Tech, although they've been down here the last couple of years, they're rising, it seems, this year from a win and loss perspective in football. I'm actually going to see them play Western Kentucky tomorrow night. But traditionally been very strong in the diamond sports, baseball, softball. They've done a nice job with facilities, albeit FEMA money. They had a horrendous tornado come through several years ago, but were able to get brand new baseball, softball, women's soccer. They've done some upgrades to their football stadium as well. So I think they'll be an outstanding addition to the Sun Belt. But again, going back and looking at the process, Keith Gill deserves a lot of credit, because yes, there was some pushback from schools in the eastern half, and the ability of Keith to kind of navigate that and get everybody on the same page to endorse La Tech. Hats off to him.
Can you say it sounds like there were schools interested? It was not a matter of now, but maybe later.
Yeah, and I think there were a couple.
Specifically, one of the teams you're going to watch in football games, against.
Yeah, it's
just throwing that out
interesting
there.
because it's cyclical, and it's what was in vogue in the 70s has rotated back through, or the 80s, and
right.
Hey, Middle Tennessee and Western Kentucky, both former members of the Sun Belt,
that's basically
opted,
it. Right?
who opted for greener pastures, alleged greener pastures, back in consideration. But yeah, I think it ended in a nice spot. Again, some natural rivalries there. I know Southern Miss and La Tech have had some pretty significant rivalries over the years. Obviously, Monroe and La Tech, and Lafayette and La Tech. So I do think from a travel standpoint, especially for the schools in the West, it's going to be a benefit. And I also think from an attendance standpoint, I think whether it's La Tech going to Monroe or vice versa, or La Tech going to Lafayette or to Hattiesburg, I think you're going to see a bump in some attendance figures as well.
All right.